Crystal Dynamics. Well, what can we say about this particular video game company, eh? Well, let's do a little history lesson, shall we? It all started in the 1990s, where Crystal Dynamics joined the video game industry and made video games for the Panasonic 3DO, PlayStation, and Nintendo 64. And there was one trilogy that Crystal Dynamics has been known for back in the 90s, and now sadly underrated, and that was the Gex trilogy, which was their first 3D platformer series. And after finishing up Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko, it was time for Crystal Dynamics to move on to the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube. From that point on, they made several games for these consoles, but most of them were lackluster, underwhelming, or just plain mediocre. That is until 2003, when Crystal Dynamics finally made another 3D platformer ever since the Gex trilogy, and that was Whiplash. So is this platformer just as good as the Gex trilogy, or is it something completely different? Well, that's why I'm here, to give you info on this underrated gem. The story takes place in somewhere in Canada, I think. I don't know, the game never tells you. Anyway, where there's a powerful empire known as Genron, an organization where scientists use animals as experiments to make new technology to make people's lives more modern. We then later meet our protagonists, Spanx, a silent experimented long-tailed weasel, and Redmond, an indestructible white rabbit, and for some reason the only animal in the whole game that can speak. They are the first animals to escape, and they're both chained together. After escaping from security guards, they encounter a mysterious voice who helps aid Spanx and Redmond into helping them free the other animals, defeat the head of the Empire, Franklin D. Mann, and shut down the Empire for good. So that's the story. Yeah, pretty predictable, but that's not the highlight of the game. For the gameplay, you play as Spanx, who has the standard platforming abilities like jump, double jump, climbing, you know. The gameplay actually feels similar to Gex Enter the Gecko, where you enter a level and are given a number of missions to do, like rescuing animals, destroy machines, or defeat bosses. So what's your attacks in this game, you may ask? Yeah, I shit you not. The weapon you have in this game is Redmond himself due to his indestructibility. Spanx can use him to beat the crap out of enemies and destroy a lot of shit in the game. Oh yeah! Redmond can also be used as a tool to jam machineries to open locked doors, as a grappling hook to get across heights, among other uses. Spanx can also use Redmond to set him on fire to burn enemies, become electrified to power up stuff, become frozen to freeze enemies into ice, and become radioactive to turn enemies toxic. Spanx can also insert Redmond into helium tanks where he can float him and Spanx like a balloon to reach higher places Spanx cannot reach on foot. Redmond also has a power rage just like Spanx's health bar, where if you're able to build up enough rage by destroying stuff, Redmond will go ballistic and break anything that comes close to him. If you ask me what the overall highlight of this game is, it'll be the ability to destroy so many stuff. Hell yeah! And every object in the game you break, you will earn money that the Empire loses. And if you complete the game with over $6 million earned, you will unlock a special content. But I'm not going to spoil it for you. Other than the money you earn by smashing shit, the other collectibles in the game are hyper snacks, which can be collected by defeating an enemy. You can use the hyper snacks to level up Spanx's health bar or Redman's rage bar. I also want to address that the levels in this game are more bigger and non-linear than any other levels Crystal Dynamics has put in their games, and trust me, there are a lot of obstacles in Whiplash that will test your platforming skills. Sure, most of the missions in the game can get repetitive and easy after a while, but when it comes to getting to certain locations, and that takes a lot of skills, it really becomes a challenge. The game also feels like a stealth game as well, because there are some parts where you have to dodge lasers and security cameras, otherwise you'll become face to face with spider robots. My favourite missions in the game are rescuing animals. It feels so heroic to set them free from all the animal cruelty they're suffering through, and when that animal is free, it will help you defeat the enemies. Now on to boss battles. Well, not all of them are memorable because most of the boss battles are just like fighting enemies, only longer and harder. And to tell you the truth, fighting the bosses in the same way as fighting enemies is just boring, but there are other bosses in the game that reminisce boss battles from past 3D platformers like Banjo-Kazooie. For example, one boss in the game, which was a monster made out of toxic waste, reminded me of the Great Mighty Pooh boss fight from Conker's Bad Fur Day. As for the level designs, other than the non-linearity, Whiplash not only has museum/laboratory levels, but as you progress in the game, the levels become more different and more bigger. Not to mention, they become more creepier and twisted, like the medical level with all the doctors and nurses really did give me the creeps. I can also say the same thing about the soundtrack, although I am a little disappointed with the soundtrack. I mean, we all know platformers can guarantee catchy and memorable soundtracks, but in this game, the soundtrack is not that catchy nor is it memorable. It's just all generic heavy metal music that is in really poor quality, even for 2003 standards. Except for the creepy medical level music.
Reek the whirlwind, Genron, reek it! Yay!
God, so damn twisted and creepy. Ugh. Voice acting wise, it's decent enough in the cutscenes, but the worst part of the voice acting is the voices of the AI. I mean, every time they see you, they always say something stupid like, "Stop or I can kill you!" Which really gets irritating, trust me. Now on to controls. Well, for the most part the controls are fine, but sometimes they can become a tad unresponsive when you're doing the grappling hook parts. But other than that, the controls are smooth and comfortable to get grips with. Simple as that. As for the camera, well, here's something we notice about the camera. Mainly the fact that it sucks. Yeah, the camera is a little too uncooperative, though it doesn't kill the game. So overall, the controls are spot on and the camera is crap. Now to move on to rants. Yes, the game does have really good parts, but is also flawed as well. The biggest flaw within this game is backtracking. Yes, there's backtracking in this game, I'm afraid, because whenever you go to a new level, it tells you that you need to complete a specific mission in another level that you missed, which really sucks. This can also become a problem when you have to constantly jam machineries to open locked doors to get back to the levels, and it gets really repetitive. Another problem I have with the game is waiting in those elevators. I mean, there's so many in this game, and you have to wait while listening to this weird music. Plus, there were some levels in the game that I really disliked, like the robotics level where you have to constantly fight robots, and the power level, even though it did have a lot of platforming, it still felt frustrating to go through. And that's all I have to rant about this game. Now for final verdict. Well, Whiplash is not only the last 3D platformer made by Crystal Dynamics, but also the last good video game from Crystal Dynamics until they had to continue the Tomb Raider series and made it very mediocre. This is indeed an enjoyable platformer, so does that mean it's as good as the Gex trilogy? Well, nearly. I like the Gex trilogy just a little better than this game. As I said before, the game suffers from mediocre music and backtracking, but regardless, this was a great conclusion to Crystal Dynamics' work on 3D platformers, and it's a shame we never got a sequel for this game due to the lackluster reception the game got. The game was also criticised by the RSPCA from the UK due to all the cartoonish animal cruelty presented in the game, probably the reason for the game's reception, even though this is one of the most funniest and most underrated 3D platformers I played. So if you like platforming, smashing stuff up, and beating the hell out of enemies, Whiplash is your game. That's why I give it a 7.4 out of 10, meaning good.